It was a quiet morning in Pleasant Grove, Utah. A little girl came home from preschool with her dad, but as they walked inside, something felt off. The house was too quiet, and when they went upstairs, they found something no child should ever see. Her mother was in the bathtub, not moving, not answering. Her dad called 911, but the call was strange, and the story he told didn't quite make sense. Before she died, the woman had told her daughter, "If something happens to me, don't trust your dad." What really happened in that house? And why did a perfect family fall apart so fast? If you're a fan of true crime and criminal investigations, you won't want to miss our new book, The Ultimate Book of Serial Killers: 180 Files of the World's Most Notorious Murderers, now available on Amazon. You can also purchase the PDF version directly from our website for instant download. You'll find the link in the video description and in a pinned comment. Now, let's dive into today's case. Michelle Summers was born on January 15, 1957, in Concord, California. A bright and promising girl raised in a close-knit Mormon household where family values and faith were cornerstones of daily life. Her parents worked hard to create a nurturing home, and Michelle thrived in that environment. At school, she was a standout in every way: a top student, a talented violinist, a cheerleader, and the kind of girl who effortlessly drew admiration from both peers and teachers. Her beauty was undeniable, and she often took part in beauty pageants. In 1976, she earned the title of Miss Concord, a symbol of the poise, grace, and charisma she carried so naturally. Faith shaped the Summers family. As members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they attended services regularly and immersed themselves in the church community. It was at a singles church gathering that Michelle first crossed paths with Martin McNeil, a well-groomed, articulate, and confident young man who introduced himself with a quiet intensity and a polished charm. His confidence captivated Michelle almost instantly. Within a month, they were married. What followed seemed like a fairy tale. Michelle settled into married life with devotion. She dreamed of being a mother, and within 5 years, that dream was well underway. She and Martin welcomed 4 children: Rachel, Vanessa, Alexis, and Damien. Michelle dedicated herself entirely to raising them, managing their large, elegant home with meticulous care. To neighbors, she was the picture of maternal warmth, nurturing, graceful, always ensuring the children were well-dressed and well-mannered. While Michelle managed the household, Martin pursued a rigorous academic path, earning degrees in both medicine and law. He became a practicing psychiatrist, although his pride in his accomplishments often overshadowed his humility. He was known to flaunt his success, his title, his status, his wealth. Those around him saw a man enamored with his image. Yet behind the facade, in private, Martin could be unpredictable. As the years passed, the McNeil family expanded. When their daughter Vanessa struggled with substance abuse and an unplanned pregnancy, Michelle and Martin decided to adopt the baby girl and named her Ada. Later, they chose to adopt 3 more girls, Giselle, Elle, and Sabrina, from Ukraine. With 8 children and a seemingly ideal life, the McNeils appeared to embody the American dream. But the glossy exterior masked growing cracks. Despite being a psychiatrist, Martin McNeil's own mental health had long been fragile. In 1994, an inappropriate relationship with a female patient came to light. The resulting fallout led to a dramatic episode in which Martin threatened suicide. Similar incidents would repeat, one in 2000 when Michelle caught him consuming explicit material, and again in 2005 under eerily similar circumstances. Each time, he spiraled into threats and instability. For someone trained to heal others, Martin displayed a concerning pattern of emotional volatility. As Martin approached his 50s, a transformation began, one that Michelle couldn't ignore. He lost weight, began working out, started tanning. His appearance became a sudden obsession. He claimed it was for his health, but Michelle couldn't shake the feeling that something else was driving the change. He started spending more and more time away from home. Work, he said. But Michelle wasn't convinced. Friends noticed it too. His absences, his growing detachment. When Michelle voiced her suspicions to her daughter Alexis, they decided to investigate. Late one night, they accessed Martin's phone records and found a recurring number. The name attached to it, Gypsy Willis. The name meant nothing to them, but the frequency of calls, especially late at night, raised serious concerns. Michelle confronted Martin. He denied everything. There was no affair, he insisted. He simply cared about his appearance. And perhaps Michelle should too. In a twist of manipulation, he suggested that she consider plastic surgery, hinting it would improve her confidence and even revitalize their relationship. It was a cutting remark, but one that Michelle began to consider. She had never felt compelled to alter her appearance, but now, after years of devotion and motherhood, the suggestion lingered. Perhaps if she looked younger, more vibrant, she could reclaim her husband's affection. Perhaps the version of herself Martin seemed to want was one she could become. Once she expressed interest, Martin wasted no time. He wanted the procedure scheduled immediately, within the week. Michelle hesitated. She preferred a summer date, something with more time to prepare. But Martin was insistent, even pushy. The urgency in his voice wasn't lost on her. Spring break was coming up, and he insisted that it was the perfect opportunity. With Alexis briefly home, there would be help, and no reason to delay. Michelle hesitated, but before she could firmly decline, Martin had already made the appointment. He chose the surgeon, he chose the date, and at the consultation, he dominated the conversation. Michelle sat quietly while Martin laid out the procedures he expected. A facelift, certainly, but also a nose reshaping, eyelid lift, and a refinement of her chin line. The list grew longer. The session, which would ultimately require 9 hours under anesthesia, was approved with little pushback, likely because the request came from a fellow doctor. On April 3, 2007, Michelle entered the operating room. The procedures were extensive. When she woke up, her face was swollen and painful, but that was expected. What wasn't expected were the additional medications Martin requested for her recovery. 5 different drugs, powerful painkillers, and sleep aids, none of which were typically prescribed together. Martin claimed his wife had a low pain tolerance. He promised the surgeon he would personally oversee her post-op care. Despite Martin's insistence, Michelle stayed one more night at the hospital. Her blood pressure was elevated, and she felt uneasy. The next morning, Alexis brought her home, but Martin quickly took control again, assuring his daughter he had no work and could manage everything. Alexis stepped away for the afternoon. When she returned the next morning, what she saw shook her. Her mother was heavily sedated, incoherent, and barely able to respond. Michelle, usually so poised, seemed buried under a haze of medication. Alexis confronted her father, who admitted he may have overdone it with the pills. He claimed she had vomited earlier and that he was simply trying to keep her calm. But Alexis was in medical school. She knew this wasn't normal. From that moment on, she took over Michelle's medication schedule. She stayed home the entire week, keeping a close watch. But time was limited. Spring break was almost over. Before she returned to school, Alexis had a quiet, sobering moment with her mother. During a bath, while Alexis washed her hair, Michelle whispered a warning. Martin, she said, had been slipping her pills she didn't recognize. Her eyes were still bandaged from surgery, and she couldn't see what she was taking. She asked Alexis to show her the shape of each prescription so she could memorize them by touch. Then, in a chilling moment of clarity, Michelle added, "If anything happens to me, make sure it wasn't your father." It was a strange thing to say, but Alexis had no choice. Her break was over. The next morning, April 11th, before 9 a.m., Alexis spoke to her mother on the phone. Michelle sounded better, clearer, even cheerful. She said Martin was treating her kindly, much more attentive since Alexis had returned to school. It gave Alexis a sliver of comfort. That would be the last time they spoke. Martin had errands that day. There was a medical trade event he needed to attend. Around 11:30 a.m., he returned home with their youngest daughter, Ada, after picking her up from preschool. The house was silent. Michelle didn't answer their calls. Martin began searching the ground floor. He asked Ada to look upstairs. Minutes later, the child's scream broke the silence. Michelle was floating in the bathtub, unresponsive, submerged in water. Martin, using a cane at the time due to an injury, struggled to climb the stairs. By the time he reached her, it was too late to pull her out. He drained the water and sent Ada to fetch a neighbor while he dialed 911, but instead of calm urgency, the emergency call was marked by rage. Martin barked at the dispatcher, shouted his answers, and abruptly hung up before giving a full address. When dispatchers called back, he yelled again and disconnected. On the third attempt, they finally got an address, but it was the wrong one. Whether by accident or design, that mistake would cost precious minutes. The ambulance arrived 30 minutes after the initial call. Paramedics found Michelle unconscious, drenched, and with no pulse. They did everything they could to revive her, but by the time they arrived, she was already gone. At the hospital, the scene turned chaotic, but not because of the medical team. It was Martin. His erratic behavior, already evident during the 911 call, continued with unsettling intensity. While the paramedics fought to restart Michelle's heart, Martin stood nearby, shouting. He kept demanding answers no one could give, barking accusations at the unconscious woman in front of him. Why? He screamed. Had she insisted on plastic surgery? His tone wasn't one of sorrow, it was of blame. His anger was jarring. Medics tried to focus on Michelle, ignoring the noise. To them, he seemed to be in shock, but it was a kind of shock that felt performative, distracting. As the doctors continued resuscitation efforts, Martin stepped aside long enough to call his daughter, Alexis. The message was brief, cold even. Her mother had been found in the bathtub, unconscious. No emotion, no explanation. For Alexis, it was like the final piece of a terrible puzzle falling into place. Her mother's whispered warning echoed in her mind. If anything happens to me, make sure it wasn't your father. She rushed to the airport. Back at the hospital, Michelle's heart never restarted. 45 minutes of emergency care couldn't bring her back. Martin, frantic again, allegedly offered the paramedics $10,000 if they would keep trying to save her, but it was too late. she was gone. Michelle McNeil was pronounced dead on April 11, 2007. Her cause of death, according to the initial autopsy, was classified as natural, a combination of myocarditis, cardiovascular disease, and high blood pressure. No mention of foul play. No investigation. To outsiders, that was the end of the story, but not to those who truly knew her. Her children were devastated. Her siblings were stunned. Alexis, in particular, refused to believe that her mother's death was simply the result of a failing heart. To her, the signs were unmistakable. Her father had drugged Michelle, had fed her pills she didn't need, masked under the guise of post-surgery care. The overdose hadn't been random. It had been orchestrated. Even before she returned home, Alexis contacted her sister Rachel and begged her to go to the house. There was one thing she needed above all: the pills. She wanted to count them, document them, determine exactly how many their mother had ingested. But when Rachel searched, the medications were nowhere to be found. Martin claimed he had no idea where they'd gone. Perhaps, he said, the police had taken them. Maybe they were misplaced, possibly in the garage. But then came the confession from Michelle's son, Damien. He told his sisters that their father had asked him to flush all the pills down the toilet. He said the sight of them made Martin feel even more depressed. To Alexis, this was no coincidence. And then, in a move that only deepened the family's suspicion, Martin arranged the funeral with alarming speed, just 3 days after Michelle's death. Not only that, but he took the extraordinary step of barring members of Michelle's own family from attending. He told them outright, if any of them showed up, he would call the police. For a man grieving the sudden loss of his wife, Martin McNeil didn't seem broken. He seemed focused, on control, on appearances, on shutting people out. This wasn't grief. This was strategy. And for Alexis and the rest of the family, one thing became terrifyingly clear. Martin had gotten away with it. At least, for now. None of Michelle's family members showed up at the funeral. Despite their grief, they chose to stay away, unwilling to stir conflict. But one unfamiliar woman did attend, a young brunette. No one knew her name, and no one thought much of her at the time. But soon, they would all learn exactly who she was. In the days after Michelle's death, Martin announced that he needed help around the house. With 4 young daughters still at home, ranging from 6 to 12, he insisted he couldn't manage alone. Alexis offered to step in. She was willing to put her education on hold to care for her siblings. But Martin refused. He told her not to sacrifice her career. He said he'd already found someone else for the job. Her name was Gypsy. Alexis and Rachel froze when they heard it. Could it be Gypsy Willis? The same woman their mother believed was having an affair with Martin? When they asked, Martin admitted it was her, but he dismissed any talk of infidelity. Within 2 weeks of Michelle's burial, Gypsy moved into the family home. She wasn't a nanny by any standard definition. She didn't cook, she didn't clean, and she rarely interacted with the children. But she doted on Martin, constantly by his side, caring for him as though she were already his wife. Just 3 months after Michelle's death, Martin took Gypsy to meet her parents. There, he proclaimed his love for her. She was, he said, the great love of his life, something he had never felt for Michelle. And before they left, Martin proposed. Alexis and Rachel were horrified. The memory of their mother was still fresh, and here was their father, celebrating a new love. When Alexis confronted him, Martin responded by banishing her. She was no longer welcome at the family home. Then he gathered the remaining children and declared that Alexis was no longer part of the family. None of the siblings were to speak to her again. But Alexis didn't back down. She and Rachel started a blog, a space to search for the truth. And soon, messages began pouring in. Stories from women who claimed to have had affairs with Martin during his marriage to Michelle. The sisters took this information to the police. It wasn't evidence of murder, but it was enough to spark interest. Two detectives took notice and began pulling at the threads of Martin's life. What unraveled was staggering. Martin McNeil, who proudly flaunted his title as doctor, had never completed high school. When he applied to medical school, he used someone else's diploma. And after marrying Michelle, he was arrested for fraud, opening a bank account under a deceased person's name and writing $36,000 in bad checks. The spending spree was absurd. Jewelry, furniture, dozens of pairs of socks and shoes, and a full year's supply of chocolate-covered cherries. He was sentenced to 2 years, but served only 180 days. Still, somehow, he became a licensed physician. Even his mental health history was troubling. When he briefly served in the military, he was discharged after claiming he heard voices urging him to kill. That didn't stop him from collecting a veteran's pension, $3,000 a month, for 30 years, even as he thrived financially as a doctor. For Alexis and Rachel, the man they once idolized was now unrecognizable. Alexis had become a doctor because of him. She thought he stood for healing and integrity. She couldn't have been more wrong. In 2009, both Martin and Gypsy were arrested, not for murder, but for identity theft. They had sent their adopted daughter Giselle to Ukraine, promising it would only be for 2 months, but they cut off all contact. It was never about visiting family. Martin and Gypsy had abandoned her, so they could steal her identity. Using Giselle's social security number, they created a new person, Jillian McNeil, a fake daughter. With this false identity, Gypsy applied for new loans, hoping to erase her bad credit and escape her debt. The scheme unraveled when investigators began surveillance. Martin was arrested at the airport. Gypsy was picked up at his house the same day. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. She received 2. And with both behind bars, detectives turned their full attention to Michelle's death. The autopsy was re-examined. Toxicology reports revealed 4 or 5 prescription drugs in her system, medications only administered within an hour of her death. But Alexis had left the house just hours before, and Michelle had told her she felt well enough not to need anything else. Blindfolded from surgery, Michelle wouldn't have taken them on her own. Alexis suspected the pills had been slipped into her food. Other inconsistencies mounted. Ada, the youngest daughter, said she found Michelle fully submerged, lying flat in the tub. But Martin claimed he found her slumped over, with her legs outside the tub and head submerged, as if she fainted while standing. That didn't add up. If most of Michelle's body was outside the tub, Martin, a physically fit man, should have had no trouble pulling her out. He also claimed he performed CPR, but when paramedics arrived, a large amount of water gushed from Michelle's lungs, evidence that no CPR had actually been attempted. Proper resuscitation would have expelled the water earlier. Even the neighbor who responded to Ada's screams confirmed Michelle was seated in the tub, face up, submerged, when she arrived. Then came a breakthrough. 2 months after Martin was released in 2012, he was arrested again, this time for murder. The trial began in October 2013. Witnesses came forward. One was Anna, Martin's former lover. She testified that Martin once confessed to killing multiple people, including his own brother Roy. He told her Roy had attempted suicide, and when Martin found him bleeding in the tub, he simply finished the job by pushing his head underwater. Anna said Martin had even offered to kill her husband because she'd complained about how he treated her. Another bombshell. Martin had suggested a suicide pact to his troubled daughter Vanessa. Alexis believed, had she agreed, she might not have survived. Then came the most chilling testimony of all, from Gypsy's former roommate. She revealed that Martin and Gypsy had been in a relationship for over a year before Michelle's death. They talked openly about getting rid of her. Gypsy had even joked about poison or sabotaging Michelle's car. After 11 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Martin McNeil was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. But prison wouldn't hold him forever. On April 6, 2017, just 2.5 years into his sentence, Martin was found unconscious near the prison greenhouse. In an area with no surveillance cameras, he had used greenhouse chemicals to end his life. 2 inmates found him, but it was too late. He died without ever admitting guilt. Detectives later uncovered one final twist. After Michelle's death, Martin had rewritten his will. Each of his children would receive just $1. The remainder of his estate would go to Gypsy Willis. Even in death, Martin tried to erase the people he hurt most, but his daughters made sure the truth wouldn't be buried with him.
Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.